The Texas sun burned hot over the quiet suburbs of Austin, where Mark and Linda Calloway lived in their elegant two-story home. On the outside, their marriage seemed perfect. Mark was a respected businessman, and Linda was a beloved community volunteer. But behind closed doors, their marriage was far from ordinary. Mark and Linda had an open marriage. They had agreed on it after 10 years of traditional monogamy, both convincing themselves it would keep their relationship fresh and exciting. Mark enjoyed the arrangement, often spending nights with younger women he met through discreet apps. Linda, on the other hand, hated it. She had agreed only to keep Mark happy, but the jealousy burned inside her like wildfire. The final straw came when Mark developed an interest in someone forbidden, her younger sister, Rachel. Rachel Monroe, at 26, was everything Linda once was: young, vibrant, and full of life. She was engaged to a loving fiancé, Jake Thompson, a devoted man who had built a successful career in construction. Their wedding was set to take place in just a few days, and Rachel was overjoyed. But Linda wasn't. The moment she saw Mark looking at Rachel the way he once looked at her, something snapped. She couldn't stand the thought of her husband being interested in her own sister. Mark had crossed a line, an unforgivable one. Linda decided she needed to teach Rachel a lesson, to destroy the purity that made her so desirable. She reached out to an old friend, Jason Keller, a man with a violent past who owed her a favor. The plan was simple but cruel. On the night before Rachel's wedding, Jason and two of his friends would abduct her, assault her, and leave her broken. Linda justified it in her mind. Rachel was already too perfect. A little suffering would make her less desirable, less happy, and most importantly, less of a threat. She arranged everything in secret, telling Jason exactly when and where Rachel would be alone. The betrayal was deep, but Linda felt no remorse. In her mind, she was protecting what was hers. The next morning, the city awoke to horrifying news. Rachel had been found bruised, broken, and traumatized. The wedding was called off immediately. Rachel was too devastated to even speak. Jake, heartbroken, was ready to kill someone. Mark was furious, demanding justice. And Linda, she played the role of the supportive sister perfectly, shedding crocodile tears while secretly enjoying the destruction she had caused. She thought she had won. She was wrong. Detective Sam Walker was a seasoned investigator with 20 years on the force. He was known for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice. When he was assigned to Rachel's case, he immediately knew something wasn't right. There were too many coincidences. The attack seemed personal. It wasn't a random crime, it was calculated. As he examined Rachel's bruises and the location of the assault, his gut told him there was a deeper story behind this tragedy. And if there was one thing Sam Walker was good at, it was uncovering the truth. Detective Sam Walker pulled up to the scene of the assault just as the Texas sun dipped below the horizon. The area was an abandoned lot behind a gas station on the outskirts of town. It was a place where no one would hear screams, a calculated choice. The local officers had already taped off the crime scene, but Walker could tell they hadn't found much. Rachel had been discovered by a trucker who had stopped for a late-night refuel. She had been left in a state of shock, her wedding dress still hanging in her hotel closet, untouched. Walker crouched down, examining the dirt where Rachel had been found. There were tire tracks, deep grooves from a large vehicle, a van or an SUV, he guessed. Close by, a cigarette butt still smoldered. He pulled on gloves and picked it up with tweezers. Marlboro Reds. Not many people smoked them anymore. Any cameras? He asked Officer Daniels, a young cop fresh out of training. The gas station across the street has some, but they only cover the pumps. Nothing back here, Daniels replied. Walker sighed. He had handled dozens of cases like this before. Women attacked and discarded like trash. But this wasn't random. This was targeted. He could feel it. At St. David's Medical Center, Rachel Monroe lay in her hospital bed, her body covered in bruises, her face blank. The machines beeped steadily around her. Walker stepped in quietly, his boots barely making a sound on the hospital floor. He had seen victims in this state before, paralyzed by fear, by shame, by something deeper. He sat down next to her bed, his voice gentle but firm. Rachel, I know this is hard, But I need to ask you some questions. Rachel didn't move. She just stared at the ceiling, her hands gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Walker leaned forward. I promise you, I'll find who did this. But I need your help. For a moment it seemed like she would speak, but then a single tear rolled down her cheek, and she turned away. Walker sighed. It was too soon. As he stood to leave, a new voice spoke behind him. She's not ready to talk, Linda said. Walker turned, meeting the eyes of Rachel's older sister. She was beautiful, with sharp features and dark, calculating eyes. She wore black, as if she were mourning, but Walker noticed her makeup was perfect, her nails freshly done. I understand, Walker said, but I will need to speak with her soon. Linda nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course. We just want justice. Something about her tone felt off. Walker had been in this game long enough to recognize fake concern. He studied her, filing the observation away for later. Walker spent the rest of the day at his office, going over the evidence. Tire tracks suggested a large vehicle. Cigarette butt, Marlboro Reds, Rachel's silence, fear, shame, or something else. Linda's reaction, too smooth, too rehearsed. Then something caught his attention. The security footage from the gas station showed a black van driving by around the time of the attack. It didn't stop for gas. It just drove past, slow and deliberate. Walker leaned closer to the screen. The footage was grainy, but he could make out a sticker on the rear bumper. A skull. His heart quickened. He had seen that sticker before. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. This is Walker. I need a list of every known associate of Jason Keller. Jason Keller, a name that had come up too many times in cases like this. Ex-convict, history of assault, and more importantly, an old friend of Linda Calloway. Walker didn't believe in coincidences. Someone had set Rachel up, and he was going to find out who. Jason Keller was no stranger to the criminal underworld of Texas. In fact, his name had appeared on multiple police reports over the years, always in connection with violent crimes, assault, robbery, and even an attempted murder charge that had been mysteriously dropped. Keller was known for his aggressive behavior and violent temper, but he had somehow always slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Walker's instincts told him that Keller was more than just a random associate. He was a key player. The list of associates Keller had been connected with was long and disturbing, but there was one name that stood out above the rest: Linda Calloway. They had been friends for years, with rumors swirling about their close ties. Keller had a reputation for doing favors for the right price, and Linda had the money and connections to make things disappear. Walker leaned back in his chair, reviewing the details on his computer screen. There was no direct evidence tying Linda to Keller in the case, but the circumstantial evidence was starting to paint a disturbing picture. Linda Calloway and Jason Keller had been close for a long time. In fact, Keller's criminal activities seemed to align with Linda's occasional personal problems. A few small incidents where she had needed help getting rid of something or someone. This pattern suggested that Linda may have used Keller's violent past for her own benefit. Walker began to make phone calls. He reached out to the local bars and clubs, places Keller was known to frequent. It didn't take long for the first lead to surface. A bartender at a rundown dive bar near the outskirts of Austin remembered Keller and a woman who matched Linda's description from several months ago. They had been seen leaving together late one night, and the bartender had heard Keller talking about a big favor he owed a woman. The bartender couldn't remember the specifics, but it was enough to keep Walker's suspicions alive. The next day, Walker paid a visit to Linda at her home. She greeted him with the same practiced smile that had fooled so many people before. But Walker could sense that she was hiding something. "Detective, I assume you've made progress," Linda said, her voice cool but laced with a slight tension. "I have a few more questions," Walker replied, his tone calm and direct. "I need to know about your relationship with Jason Keller." Linda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "Jason? He's just an old acquaintance. We've known each other for years." She paused, watching his reaction. "Why? Is he somehow involved in my sister's attack?" "I think he might be," Walker said. "And I think you might have more to do with it than you're letting on." Linda's face tightened. That's a ridiculous accusation. Jason and we don't talk like that anymore. He's just a criminal from my past. She stepped closer to him, her eyes narrowing. I'm telling you, detective, if you keep pushing this, you'll regret it. Walker didn't flinch. He had heard threats like this before. But the way she said it, there was something there. The veiled warning didn't sit well with him. He wasn't going to back down. I'll be back, Linda, Walker said, and I'll find out the truth. While Walker was focused on Linda's possible involvement, he didn't ignore Rachel's side of the story. Rachel, still recovering in the hospital, hadn't been fully cooperative, but something had begun to change. She had started to open up, albeit in small pieces. Rachel's fiancé, Jake Thompson, sat next to her bedside, holding her hand. Jake was visibly distraught, torn between wanting to protect Rachel and wanting to get to the truth. Detective, Rachel's been through a lot, Jake said when Walker entered the room. But she's not the kind of person who would keep secrets. I don't think she knows what happened, but there's something she's not telling you. She's been acting weird for a while now. Walker sat down across from them. Jake, I understand, but if Rachel knows something, I need her to tell me. She could be in danger. Rachel looked at the floor, her lips trembling. I don't know. I can't remember. She broke off, her voice catching in her throat. Walker was patient. Rachel, take your time. You don't have to talk if you're not ready, but when you are, I'll be here. Later that night, as Walker prepared to leave the hospital, Rachel's voice called out to him. Detective, she said softly, there's something I remember. Walker turned back. What is it, Rachel? She hesitated for a moment before continuing. I remember Linda. She came to visit me a few days before the wedding. She looked worried. She asked if I was sure about marrying Jake. She said that if I wasn't careful, I might lose everything. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. And I thought she was just jealous, but now I wonder, did she know something? Did she know what was going to happen? A chill ran down Walker's spine. The more Walker dug into Linda Calloway's life, the more the pieces fell into place. Linda's perfect facade was beginning to crumble. The truth was darker than Walker had imagined. Rachel's memory of Linda's visit days before the attack was more than just a conversation about jealousy. It was a warning, one that made him question everything he had assumed about Rachel's assailants. Rachel's recollection triggered a series of events that Walker could not ignore. He went back to his office and reviewed the list of Jason Keller's associates once again. But this time, he wasn't just looking at Keller. He focused on people connected to Linda. There had to be someone else. The search led him to a disturbing discovery. Linda had a history with one of Keller's known associates, a man named Roy Marks, a local thug with a violent streak. Roy had a reputation for intimidating people into submission, and he had ties to Keller's circle, often acting as a muscle for more unsavory jobs. The connection between Roy and Linda was strong. They had crossed paths more than once, and Walker's instincts told him that Linda had used Roy to do her dirty work before. It didn't take long for the pieces to fit together. If Linda had orchestrated Rachel's assault, it would explain why everything felt off. The planning, the timing, and the unusual cruelty all pointed to a woman who had carefully controlled every detail. Linda's motives had always been shrouded in jealousy, but Walker's investigation revealed something far more sinister. Mark Calloway, her husband, had become increasingly distant over the years. The open marriage that had once been a source of excitement had slowly eroded the trust in their relationship. But Linda wasn't willing to let go. She needed to retain control, and Rachel, with her youth and beauty, was a threat to that control. Linda had seen her sister as a rival for years, and when Mark's attention shifted to Rachel, Linda had decided to act. The idea of Rachel marrying Jake Thompson, the man she thought was perfect for her, had been too much. It was not just about love or loyalty, it was about power. Linda needed to remain the center of attention, and she couldn't let Rachel take that from her. The betrayal was clear. Linda had manipulated her husband's desire and turned it into a weapon against her sister. She had used Jason Keller and Roy Marks to carry out her plan. But what she hadn't counted on was Walker's persistence. Armed with new evidence, Walker knew it was time to confront Linda. He arrived at the Calloway household late one evening, the sky dark and the air heavy with tension. Linda was alone in the living room, sitting in an armchair, a glass of wine in hand. She seemed calm, collected, as always. "Detective," she greeted him, her voice smooth but with an edge that made Walker's skin crawl. "I didn't expect you to come back here so soon. I assume you've made progress in the investigation?" Walker didn't waste time. He placed the file on the coffee table and sat down across from her. "I've made a lot of progress, Linda. I know about your relationship with Jason Keller, and I know about Roy Marks. You used them to destroy your sister's life, didn't you?" Linda's face remained impassive, but Walker could see the slightest twitch in her hand, the grip tightening around her glass. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "I didn't do anything. You had the motive, the means, and the opportunity," Walker replied, his voice unwavering. "You wanted to hurt Rachel because Mark was interested in her, and you couldn't stand it. You used Jason and Roy to carry out your dirty work, and now you're going to pay for it." Linda's smile faltered for a moment, and for the first time Walker saw a glimpse of fear in her eyes. She quickly masked it, but it was too late. The truth was out. "You think you've won, don't you?" she asked, her voice suddenly venomous. "You think you know everything, but you have no idea what it's like to be in my position. Mark doesn't love me anymore. He never has. I was trying to save my marriage. Rachel was just an obstacle. And now you think you can just ruin me?" Walker leaned in, his gaze steady. "It's not about ruining you, Linda. It's about justice. And you're going to face the consequences of what you've done." Linda's expression darkened. She stood up, suddenly furious. "You don't understand. I had to do it. I had no choice. You can't make me feel guilty for wanting to keep my family together." Walker's voice remained calm. "What you did was a choice. You chose to destroy your sister's life for your own selfish reasons, and now you'll answer for it." Linda's face twisted with anger and something else, something darker. She took a step back, her hands shaking slightly. "You don't know who you're dealing with, detective. If you think you can just walk in here and accuse me of something I didn't do, you're mistaken." Walker stood up, his eyes locked on hers. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Linda, and I'm not going anywhere until I get the truth." The following day, Walker obtained the necessary evidence to make an arrest. Linda Calloway was taken into custody on charges of conspiracy to commit assault, accessory to rape, and attempted murder. As she was led out of her home in handcuffs, Linda's eyes met Walker's. There was no defeat in her gaze, only a quiet, eerie acceptance. She had thought she was above the law, but in the end, justice had caught up with her. Rachel, though still traumatized, began to find a small sense of relief. Her sister's betrayal was hard to process, but knowing the truth brought her some measure of peace. Walker had cracked the case, but he knew it wasn't over. There were still questions left unanswered, more details to uncover. But for now, he had exposed the darkness that had festered beneath the surface of a perfect marriage and a family torn apart by jealousy. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Linda Calloway, once seen as a pillar of the community, now sat in a cold metal chair, her face devoid of the warmth it once carried. She was no longer the charming, successful wife of a well-known businessman. Instead, she was a defendant, facing charges of conspiracy, assault, and accessory to rape. The once pristine image she had worked so hard to build was shattered. Walker stood in the back of the courtroom, observing as Linda's defense attorney made his opening arguments. He was a slick, seasoned lawyer with a reputation for getting clients off the hook. But Walker knew that this case was different. Linda's web of lies had finally unraveled. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Kate Harrison, wasted no time. She opened with a powerful statement describing Linda's calculated betrayal of her sister Rachel and her manipulation of the people around her to satisfy her own selfish desires. "Linda Calloway didn't just betray her sister," Harrison began. "She orchestrated a cruel, inhumane attack, one that shattered not only a woman's life, but also the very fabric of a family. She used her power, her wealth, and her connections to destroy Rachel's happiness, her very future, just to keep her own personal world intact." Rachel sat in the front row, her hands tightly gripping the armrests of the chair. She looked fragile, but her eyes were filled with determination. She had agreed to testify, a step that had taken incredible courage. For months, she had struggled with the idea of confronting her sister in front of the world. But now, after everything that had happened, she was ready. When it was Rachel's turn to take the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice trembled at first, but with each word she gained strength. She spoke about the love she had once shared with her sister, the trust they had built over the years, and how it had all come crashing down when she learned the truth. "I never thought my sister could do something like this to me," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "She was supposed to be my protector, my role model. But she wasn't. She was plotting against me. And it wasn't just because of Mark. It was because she couldn't stand the idea of me being happy, of me having everything she could never have." Rachel paused, looking directly at Linda. "I loved you, Linda. You were the person I looked up to. But now I realize you were just using me, manipulating me for your own selfish reasons. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about our family. You only cared about yourself." Linda's face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps regret. But it quickly vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating expression that Walker had come to know all too well. Walker sat through the entire trial, watching as the evidence was presented. He knew that every detail counted. The defense tried to discredit the prosecution's case by suggesting that Rachel had fabricated parts of her story, that she had somehow misinterpreted Linda's intentions. But the evidence was clear. The DNA evidence from the assault was irrefutable. Jason Keller's fingerprints had been found at the scene, and Roy Marks had been linked to the van seen in the vicinity of the attack. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that sealed Linda's fate. It was the financial transactions, the phone records, and the testimony from witnesses who had seen Linda and Jason together in the weeks leading up to the attack. Walker watched as the defense attorney attempted to twist the facts, but he knew that Linda was running out of places to hide. The truth was undeniable. After days of testimony and a tense period of deliberation, the jury finally returned with their verdict. Linda Calloway was found guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted into hushed whispers as the verdict was read aloud. Rachel's face was unreadable as she absorbed the news. It wasn't joy or relief that washed over her. It was a deep, aching sadness. No amount of justice could ever repair the damage Linda had done, but it was a step toward closure, toward healing. Linda's expression didn't change. There was no remorse, no regret, only a cold resignation. As she was escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs, she glanced once at Rachel, but there was nothing but silence between them. While Linda's fate was sealed, Mark's future was far from certain. The fallout from the trial had affected his reputation, and the damage to his marriage was irreparable. Despite his initial outrage and his public support of Rachel, there was a lingering sense of betrayal. Mark had been oblivious to his wife's darker side for too long. Rachel had been too kind to point it out, but Walker could see the truth. Mark had failed to see the woman he had married for who she truly was. He had been blind to the manipulation, the lies, and the toxic jealousy that had poisoned their relationship. In the months following Linda's conviction, Mark began to distance himself from the community. There were whispers about his role in the dysfunction that had plagued the Calloway family, but none of it mattered now. His marriage was over, and Rachel had nothing left to give him. She had no interest in rebuilding a relationship with a man who had stood by and allowed his wife's cruelty to unfold. The trial and conviction of Linda Calloway left a ripple effect that spread far beyond the courtroom. The Calloway family name was tarnished beyond repair, and the community that had once held Linda in high esteem turned its back on her. For Rachel, the healing process had only just begun. The scars of betrayal, the trauma of what had been done to her, would take time to fade, but she was determined to move forward. With Jake by her side, she found the strength to rebuild her life, piece by piece. As for Walker, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had uncovered the truth, exposed the lies, and brought justice to a broken family. But in his line of work, there was no true victory, only the weight of knowing how far people could go to protect their own selfish desires. The Calloway case was closed, but Walker knew that the echoes of it would linger long after the courtroom doors had closed. The damage had been done, and some wounds never healed. The days that followed Linda's conviction were a blur of mixed emotions for Rachel. There was relief, but also a deep sense of loss. The sister she had loved, admired, and trusted was now gone. Not just physically, but emotionally and morally. The betrayal had cut too deep for Rachel to ever truly forgive, but there was still a faint hope that she could rebuild her life. Jake, who had stood by her side through the darkest days, was her rock. He had always known about the strained relationship between the sisters, but had no idea it had gone as far as Rachel now revealed. Jake's unwavering support gave Rachel the strength she needed to face each day, even as the weight of her past lingered in the back of her mind. "You're not alone in this, Rachel," Jake said one evening as they sat on the porch of their small, cozy home. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. It was a new beginning for them both. "We'll face everything together." Rachel smiled faintly, her eyes tired but filled with a quiet determination. "I don't know what the future holds, Jake, but I know that I can't keep letting what happened with Linda define me. I want to move forward, but I have to let go of everything that's holding me back first." Jake nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They had been through so much together, and he knew how difficult it was for her to let go of the past. But he also knew that Rachel was strong enough to heal, even if it took time. As the weeks passed, Rachel took small steps toward healing. She began attending therapy, determined to work through the trauma and loss she had endured. The process was grueling, and there were moments when she wanted to give up. But each day she grew stronger. Rachel also started volunteering at a local women's shelter, where she could help other women who had suffered abuse and betrayal. It became her way of reclaiming her voice, of transforming her pain into something positive. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could make a difference in the lives of others who were facing similar struggles. Her work at the shelter brought her a sense of purpose, a feeling that had been missing for a long time. It allowed her to connect with other women who understood her pain, who were walking the same path of recovery. They shared stories of betrayal, loss, and resilience, and Rachel realized she was not alone in her journey. Jake was always by her side, supporting her work and offering encouragement. He had also started his own journey of growth, reflecting on his role in the dynamics between Rachel and her family. He had never known how deep the rift went, and it had caused him to rethink his own approach to relationships. Together, they began building a future not defined by the shadows of Rachel's past, but by their shared commitment to healing and love. While Rachel was working on her recovery, Linda's fate continued to unfold. In prison, Linda was not the same confident, cold woman she had once been. She had lost everything: her family, her social status, her reputation. Her life had spiraled into a bitter reality that she had never truly prepared for. Linda's trial had been the beginning of the end, but the isolation of prison life was an entirely different kind of punishment. She found herself alone with only her thoughts to keep her company. The luxuries she had once taken for granted were replaced with cold, gray walls and the harshness of a life behind bars. But even in this new life, Linda's pride refused to fade completely. She still clung to the belief that she had done what was necessary to preserve her own world. In her eyes, Rachel had always been a threat to her happiness, and the things she had done had been justified. The bitterness of her actions was something Linda refused to acknowledge. Even in the face of her downfall, there were no apologies from Linda, no remorse, no desire for reconciliation. Her pride and jealousy had been her undoing, and in prison, she remained a prisoner not just to the law, but to her own tortured emotions. Detective Walker, too, had moved on from the case, but the memory of the Calloway family stayed with him. It had been one of the most complex cases of his career, and it had left him with a deep sense of how fragile the human psyche could be. Linda's motives had been rooted in a dangerous mix of pride, jealousy, and insecurity, and Rachel, despite her suffering, had emerged as a symbol of strength. Walker spent his days working on other cases, but the Calloway case had changed him in subtle ways. He had seen too much darkness in the world to remain unaffected, but he had also witnessed the power of resilience, the ability of people like Rachel to rise above their circumstances and rebuild their lives. He often found himself reflecting on the importance of truth, not just in his line of work, but in life in general. The truth had a way of revealing itself no matter how much people tried to hide it. And in the end, It was the truth that had led to Linda's downfall and Rachel's redemption. As Rachel's healing continued, she began to look forward to a future that was no longer clouded by the past. She and Jake had started discussing their plans for marriage again, but this time, their focus was not on a perfect wedding or on the expectations of others. It was on building a partnership founded on love, trust, and respect. They had learned from the past. They had learned that nothing could ever be taken for granted and that the foundation of any relationship had to be rooted in honesty. Rachel didn't need to rush into anything. She was content to take things one step at a time, knowing that the best thing she could do for herself was to fully embrace her own journey of healing. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank hand in hand, Rachel felt a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. The sky was painted with soft hues of pink and orange, the air cool and refreshing. "You know," Rachel said, her voice quiet but full of conviction, "I'm ready to move forward now. I'm ready to build a life that's truly mine. A life that's not defined by anyone else's choices but my own." Jake smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm with you every step of the way." For the first time in a long time, Rachel felt free. She had been through the worst and come out on the other side stronger than ever. The road ahead would be long, but she knew now that she could face anything. And so, with the weight of her past finally behind her, Rachel embraced a new beginning, a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of redemption. A year had passed since Linda's conviction, and the ripples of betrayal still reverberated through the small town. While the immediate effects of the trial had died down, the scars left by the Calloway family's fall from grace were still visible. The community had moved on, but for Rachel, the shadow of her sister's betrayal lingered like a dark cloud, even as she tried to embrace her new life. Rachel and Jake had slowly but surely built a foundation of trust, love, and understanding. They had taken things slowly, understanding that healing required patience and that no relationship could thrive without time to grow. Though their relationship had deepened, Rachel often found herself questioning how different things could have been if Linda hadn't betrayed her. Could they have had the perfect family? Could she have maintained that bond with her sister? But those were questions that would never have answers, and Rachel knew she had to stop living in the past. The future was hers to shape, and she would not allow the legacy of betrayal to define her. As the anniversary of the trial approached, Rachel and Jake decided it was time to take another step forward. They had talked about marriage, but the pain of Rachel's past had kept her hesitant. This time, things felt different. She was finally ready to embrace the future, and Jake would be the man she would face it with. Just as Rachel began to feel as if she were emerging from the darkness, an unexpected visitor came to her door. It was a late evening when she heard a knock, soft but persistent. Jake was working late, and Rachel was home alone. She hesitated, wondering who could be at the door at this hour. She peered through the peephole and saw a familiar figure standing on the other side. Mark Calloway. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It had been months since she had seen her brother-in-law. Since Linda's arrest, Mark had kept a low profile, avoiding public appearances and speaking little to anyone in the community. The devastation caused by Linda's actions had left him broken and isolated, and Rachel had no idea what to expect from him. She opened the door slowly, taking a cautious step back. Mark stood there, looking older, thinner, and haggard. His eyes were heavy, filled with regret. "Rachel," he said softly, his voice hoarse. I didn't know who else to turn to." Rachel's heart wavered between anger and sympathy. She could see the torment in Mark's eyes, but the memories of the pain Linda had caused still ran deep. "I don't know what you want from me, Mark," Rachel said quietly, her tone guarded. "What happened with Linda was beyond anything I could have imagined. You should have done something sooner. I shouldn't have had to go through all of that alone." Mark lowered his head, clearly ashamed. "I know. I failed you, Rachel. I failed both of you. I couldn't see what was happening right in front of me, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've lost everything, my wife, my family, my reputation, and I have nothing left. I've been through hell, and I want to try to make things right, even if it's just a small gesture." Rachel took a deep breath, her emotions swirling. Part of her wanted to shut the door to cut him off as easily as she had cut Linda from her life. But the other part of her, the part that had always hoped for a family bond, felt a small flicker of compassion. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mark," she replied honestly, "but I won't forget the pain. Maybe one day we can figure out how to move forward, but that's not something I'm ready for right now." Mark nodded solemnly, accepting her words without protest. "I understand," he said quietly. "I just wanted to apologize to you and to the memory of what we once had as a family." With a final look, Mark turned and walked away. Rachel stood there for a long time, staring at the empty street outside. The visit had brought up emotions she had thought were buried. She knew that forgiveness, if it ever came, would take time, if it ever came at all. But for now, she had made it clear that she wasn't ready to reopen that chapter of her life. Though Rachel was conflicted, she knew that she couldn't let her sister's betrayal or Mark's sorrowful apology hold her back. She had come too far. She was no longer the broken woman who had lost everything. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, and she had a future to look forward to. Rachel took the next step in her journey of healing by confronting not only her past but also her fears. She and Jake decided to take a trip, just the two of them, to a place that held no memories of betrayal, a place where they could focus on what truly mattered, their love and their future. It was a small cabin in the mountains, nestled away from the noise of everyday life. The quiet serenity of the place gave Rachel the space she needed to reflect and reconnect with herself. No longer weighed down by the shadows of her past, she was free to dream again. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jake took Rachel's hand in his. He had been patient, understanding, and never once pushed her for more than she was ready to give. "I've waited for you to be ready," Jake said, his voice soft but certain. "And now that you are, I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else. Will you marry me, Rachel?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of joy and relief. She had found peace within herself, and now she was ready to embrace the future Jake offered her. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full. "Yes, I will." Though the Calloway family had been torn apart by lies, betrayal, and manipulation, Rachel's story was not one of defeat. It was one of survival, strength, and eventual peace. She had endured the worst kind of betrayal from someone she had trusted the most. But in the end, Rachel had built a life for herself that was stronger than the dark legacy Linda had left behind. In the months that followed, Rachel and Jake planned their wedding. It was simple, intimate, a celebration of their love and the journey they had taken together. Surrounded by close friends and loved ones, Rachel walked down the aisle with a smile on her face, her heart full of hope for the future. She had learned that redemption was possible, that healing could come, and that even after the deepest betrayals, a new beginning could emerge. And so, with the weight of the past behind her, Rachel stepped into a new chapter of her life, one that was no longer defined by her sister's legacy, but by her own strength and resilience. The future was hers, and she would write her own story from here on out.